A glass exploded against the wall. A man's back slammed into the edge of a booth hard enough to crack the wood. Two hands grabbed his shirt and dragged him upright. The diner went dead silent. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This story starts 3 days earlier in a motel room outside Tucson, Arizona. 2 in the morning, a man sat on the edge of a sagging mattress watching his daughter sleep. Dalton Graves was 35 years old, 6 feet even 185 pounds. Lean in the way that fighters get lean when they stop cutting weight but never stop moving. His hands rested on his knees. The knuckles were slightly swollen. They'd been that way for 15 years. Some damage doesn't heal, it just becomes part of you. The room was cheap. Particle board furniture, carpet that smelled like cigarettes and regret, a television bolted to the wall that Dalton hadn't turned on. The only light came from the bathroom door, cracked open yellow and dim. On the other bed, his daughter slept. Iris was 7 years old, small for her age, dark hair pulled into 2 braids that she'd done herself because Dalton still hadn't figured out how to make them look right. She slept on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek, the other clutching a worn stuffed rabbit that used to be white but had gone gray from years of holding. Dalton watched her breathe, in and out, steady, peaceful. He hadn't slept in 2 days. On the floor next to his bed sat a black duffel bag, unzipped. Inside, a leather championship belt caught the bathroom light. Gold plate, red strap, engraved across the center, Dalton the Surgeon Graves, underneath smaller 620, 39 KOs. He looked at it the way you might look at a photograph of someone you used to know. Dalton Graves had won his first world title in Bangkok at 21 years old, knocked out a Brazilian champion in the second round with a head kick that still got replayed on highlight reels. He'd defended that title 6 times, won a second belt in a different weight class 2 years later, then moved up again and took a third. 3 divisions, 3 titles, 62 professional fights, never lost, never even came close. The announcers used to call him the Surgeon because he didn't just beat people. He took them apart piece by piece, calm the whole time, never once losing his temper in the ring. That control, that patience, that was what made him dangerous. Not his speed, not his power, the fact that he never panicked. He'd walked away from all of it at 26. People thought he was crazy. He was still in his prime, still undefeated. Promoters offered him 7 figures for one more fight. He turned them all down. He'd promised Natalie he'd quit before the sport quit him. And he meant it, Natalie. Dalton stood up, walked to the window, pulled the curtain back an inch. The parking lot was empty except for his truck, a black Ford F-150 with a cracked taillight and 200,000 miles on it. Everything he and Iris owned was packed in the bed covered with a blue tarp and tied down with bungee cords. They were leaving Arizona, driving west, toward California, toward the ocean, toward something Dalton couldn't quite name, but knew they needed. He let the curtain fall closed. Natalie had died 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 8 months from diagnosis to funeral. Iris had been 5 years old when she watched her mother's casket go into the ground. She'd stopped talking after that. Not completely. She'd answer questions. She'd say yes and no, and I'm fine. But the long sentences, the stories she used to tell about imaginary kingdoms, and the songs she'd make up in the bathtub, all of that stopped. It was like she'd decided words were expensive, and she was done spending them on anything that didn't matter. Dalton had tried everything. Therapists, art classes, a grief counselor who specialized in children. Nothing worked. Iris was polite. She was cooperative. She just didn't talk. So he'd sold the house, packed what fit in the truck, told Iris they were driving to California. Fresh start, new school, a little apartment near the beach where she could hear the waves at night. Iris hadn't argued. She just climbed into the passenger seat and buckled herself in. Dalton looked at the clock on the nightstand. 2:17 in the morning. He should sleep. They had another long day of driving ahead. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Natalie in that hospital bed. Thin, pale, tubes running from her arms, telling him to take care of their daughter, telling him Iris had her voice in there somewhere. He just had to be patient. He had promised. And for 2 years, he'd failed. Dalton walked to his duffel bag, reached past the championship belt, and pulled out a small wooden box. Opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Natalie's handwriting. He had found it in her jewelry box a week after the funeral. It said ocean. She needs to hear something constant. He'd read it 100 times. Still didn't know exactly what it meant. But Natalie had been right about most things, so he was betting she was right about this too. He folded the note, put it back, closed the box. At 6 in the morning, Dalton woke Iris. She sat up slowly, blinking in the dim light. Didn't ask where they were. Didn't ask what time it was. Just climbed out of bed and went to the bathroom to brush her teeth. 20 minutes later, they were on the road. The truck smelled like coffee and strawberry Pop-Tarts. Iris sat in the passenger seat with a box of crayons on her lap and a coloring book open against the dashboard. She colored slowly, methodically, always staying inside the lines, always choosing colors that made sense. Blue for the sky, green for the grass, red for the barn. Dalton drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the center console. The highway stretched ahead of them, 2 lanes cutting straight through the desert. Nothing on either side but sand and scrub and the occasional dead tree. He glanced at Iris. She was coloring a horse, brown body, black mane. She hadn't said a word since they left the motel. Dalton turned on the radio, found a classic rock station, Fleetwood Mac, Landslide, Natalie's favorite song. He almost changed it, then didn't. Let it play. They drove for 3 hours, stopped at a gas station just past the California border. Dalton filled the tank while Iris used the bathroom. When she came back, she was holding a postcard. It showed the Santa Monica Pier at sunset. Palm trees, Ferris wheel, ocean stretching to the horizon. She held it up for him to see. Dalton looked at it, looked at her. She wasn't smiling, but there was something in her eyes, something that looked almost like hope. "You want that?" he asked. She nodded. He bought it, gave her a pen. She sat in the truck and wrote on the back, in careful small letters, "Dear Mom, we're going to the ocean. Love, Iris." She didn't mail it, just tucked it into her coloring book and went back to her crayons. They crossed into the Mojave Desert around noon. The temperature hit 98 degrees. The air conditioning in the truck had stopped working 2 years ago, so they drove with the windows down. Hot wind whipped through the cab. Iris's braids came loose. She didn't fix them. Dalton's mind drifted while he drove. He thought about the first time he'd stepped into a boxing ring. He'd been 14, skinny, angry. His old man had just left. His mother was working 2 jobs and still couldn't pay the rent. A coach at the local gym saw him hitting a heavy bag and told him he had fast hands, asked if he wanted to learn how to use them. Dalton did. He'd spent the next 12 years learning how to hurt people, and he'd been good at it. Better than good. By the time he was 18, he was fighting professionally. By 21, he was a world champion. But here's the thing nobody tells you about fighting. It's not the punches you take that break you. It's the punches you give. It's standing over someone you just knocked unconscious and knowing you did that. Knowing you were capable of that. Knowing some part of you enjoyed it. Dalton had never enjoyed it. Not really. But he'd been good at it. And being good at something people will pay you for, that's hard to walk away from. Until Natalie. He'd met her at a hospital. He'd broken his hand in a fight and went to get it x-rayed. She was a nurse. She'd looked at his hand and said, "You do this for a living?" He'd said yes. She'd said, "You should find a different living." Sure. He'd asked her out anyway. She'd said no. He'd asked again. She'd said no again. He'd asked a third time. She'd said, "If I say yes, will you stop hitting people for money?" He'd laughed. She hadn't. 6 months later, he proposed. A year after that, they were married. And when she got pregnant with Iris, Dalton was in Sao Paulo, Brazil, about to fight for his 3rd world title. He saw her in the crowd, saw her hand on her stomach, saw the way she looked at him. Not proud, not excited, just tired. Tired of worrying every time he stepped into a ring. He'd won the fight in the 4th round, walked back to his corner, told his coach he was done. Retired right there, didn't even wait for the press conference. Natalie had cried, happy tears, told him he'd made the right choice. And he had. He knew he had, because he got 7 years with her. 7 years of waking up next to the woman he loved. 7 years of watching Iris grow up. 7 years of being a husband and a father instead of a fighter. Then the cancer came, and it took Natalie. And now Dalton was driving through the desert with a daughter who barely spoke, in a championship belt he'd never look at again. The sun was setting when they pulled off the highway, somewhere east of Barstow, a diner called Rosie's, faded red sign, cracked parking lot. The kind of place that survives on truckers and people too tired to drive another mile. Dalton was both. He parked the truck, turned off the engine, looked at Iris. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded. Inside the diner was half empty, a couple in a corner booth, a man at the counter reading a newspaper, a waitress named Donna who looked like she'd been working doubles since the 90s. She had a kind face, tired eyes, a name tag that was crooked. She brought the menus and called Iris sweetheart. Iris almost smiled. Dalton ordered a burger and fries for himself, chicken tenders, and a chocolate shake for Iris. Donna wrote it down, took the menus, and walked away. Her shoes squeaked on the linoleum. Iris arranged her crayons on the table. Red, blue, green, yellow, orange, purple. She lined them up by size. Then she pulled out a fresh piece of paper from her coloring book and started to draw. Dalton watched her. She was drawing a house. It had a red door and 2 windows and a tree in the yard. It looked nothing like the house they'd sold in Tucson. It looked like something she was hoping for. He wanted to tell her they'd get there, wanted to promise her that things would be okay. But he'd learned not to make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. So he just watched her draw. That's when the noise started outside. Engines, not car engines, motorcycle engines, a lot of them. Deep rattling thunder that shook the windows of the diner. Donna stopped pouring coffee. The couple in the corner looked at each other. The man at the counter folded his newspaper. 8 motorcycles pulled into the lot. Harleys, chrome and black, and leather. The riders wore matching cuts. The patches read Iron Reapers, MC. Dalton's hand tightened around his coffee cup. He knew what this was. He'd seen clubs like this before. In Thailand, in Russia, in Brazil. Outlaw motorcycle clubs. Men who lived by their own rules and didn't care much for anyone else's. The bikes parked in a line, engines cut. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise. 8 men dismounted. Big, loud, laughing, shoving each other like brothers do. They came through the door like they owned the place. The leader was a man everyone would later call Viper. 6'4", maybe 270, shaved head, hands like catcher's mitts. He had a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, wore it like a badge. Viper walked straight to the counter and slapped his palm down hard enough to rattle every glass in the rack. "Coffee," he said. 8 cups and whatever food you got that's hot. Donna nodded, moved fast. She knew the drill. Serve quick. Don't make eye contact. Don't give them a reason. The bikers spread out across the diner. 2 of them slid into the booth next to Dalton and Iris. One of them knocked Dalton's arm, reaching for the ketchup. Didn't say sorry. Dalton didn't react. He just moved his arm and kept eating. Iris looked up from her drawing. She watched the bikers the way a cat watches a dog walk past. Not scared, just very still, very aware. For about 10 minutes, nothing happened. The bikers ate. They talked loud. They cursed. Viper told a story about a bar fight in Needles that made his guys laugh so hard one of them spit out his coffee. It was almost normal, almost fine. Then Viper noticed the drawing. Iris had finished the house and started a new picture. This one was a man, tall, standing with his fists up. She'd drawn it in red crayon. Viper leaned over from the next booth and squinted at it. "That's your daddy," he said. Iris didn't answer. "Hey," Viper's voice got louder. "I'm talking to you, little girl." Dalton put down his burger. "She's shy," he said. "Calm, even. She doesn't talk much." Viper looked at Dalton for the first time. Really looked at him. Dalton was not a small man, 6 feet even, 185, but he was lean, wiry. He didn't look like a fighter unless you knew what to look for, and Viper didn't know what to look for. "Shy," Viper repeated. He grinned. "That's cute." He reached across and picked up Iris's drawing, held it up for his guys. "Look at this," he said. "Kid drew a little tough guy. That's supposed to be you, Daddy." Dalton's voice stayed flat. "Give her the drawing back." "Or what?" Dalton had spent 20 years learning how to read a room, how to measure distance, how to calculate how many seconds it would take to close a gap. And right now, every number in his head was telling him the same thing. Walk away, pick up your daughter, pay the bill, leave. He'd been in this situation before, not exactly this, but close enough. A bar in Bangkok, a club in Moscow, A restaurant in Sao Paulo where a man twice his size decided Dalton's championship belt meant he had something to prove. Every time Dalton had walked away. But Viper didn't give him that option. Viper crumpled the drawing, dropped it on the floor. Then he leaned in close to Iris and said, "Your daddy's not tough, sweetheart. He's just quiet. There's a difference." Iris looked at Viper. Then she looked at her father. And she said very softly, "Don't talk, Daddy." She wasn't scared. That's not what that was. She'd seen her father train for years. She'd sat on the gym floor watching him spar with men twice her size. She knew exactly what he could do. And she was telling him, "Don't waste words. Don't warn them." Viper laughed. "Don't talk, Daddy. That's adorable." He put his hand on Iris's head. Not hard, but he touched her. He put his hand on a 7-year-old girl's head without her permission. And he did it to prove a point. Dalton moved. He didn't stand up slowly. He didn't push back his chair. 1 second he was sitting. The next second his right hand had Viper's wrist and his left elbow was driving into the side of Viper's jaw. The sound was sharp and wet, like a branch breaking. Viper's eyes rolled. His knees buckled. Dalton guided him down to the floor. Controlled. Precise. The whole thing took about a second and a half. The biker next to the booth lunged. Dalton sidestepped, caught the man's arm, used his own momentum to send him face first into the edge of the counter. His forehead hit the laminate, and he went limp. The second biker threw a punch. Dalton slipped it, drove a knee into the man's midsection, followed with a short right cross that put him on the ground. The man curled up and stayed there. 3 men, 4 seconds. That's what 20 years of training looks like when the leash comes off. The other 5 bikers were on their feet, chairs scraped back, fists clenched. But they just watched. Watched their 3 toughest guys go down without landing a single hit. The math was right there in front of them. Nobody moved. Dalton stood in the middle of the diner, breathing steady, not winded, not shaking. He looked at each of them one at a time. Slow, calm. The same way he used to look at opponents across the ring before a fight. It was a question without words. "Who's next?" Nobody answered it. Dalton turned around, sat back down in the booth, picked up a napkin and wiped a spot of blood off his elbow. "You okay?" he asked Iris. She nodded. He flagged Donna. "Can I get the check?" Donna's hands were shaking when she brought the bill. Dalton paid in cash, left a 40% tip. He picked up Iris's crayons, put them in her backpack, lifted her onto his hip. They walked past the bikers, out the front door, into the parking lot. The night air was cool and dry. Dalton buckled Iris into her car seat. She didn't say anything. She just held her backpack on her lap and watched him through the window as he walked around to the driver's side. He paused for a second, flexed his right hand. The knuckles were sore, but nothing was broken. He got in, started the engine. It was over. The whole thing. Just a bad 10 minutes in a roadside diner that would make a decent story someday. The kind of thing that happens and then doesn't happen again. Dalton pulled out of the lot, turned onto the highway, pointed the truck west toward California. The road was empty, 2 lanes cutting straight through the desert with nothing on either side but sand and scrub and darkness. Iris fell asleep before they'd gone 5 miles. Dalton adjusted the rearview mirror so he could see her face. She looked peaceful. He took a breath, loosened his grip on the steering wheel, let his shoulders drop. For the first time in hours, he felt his pulse settle back to normal. The worst was behind them. Then he checked the rear view again, and his stomach dropped. Headlights, a lot of them, staggered low to the ground, stretched across both lanes of the highway behind him. Motorcycles coming fast. Here is what Dalton didn't know. While he was paying the check and picking up crayons, Viper was in the bathroom making a phone call. Not to the cops, to a man named Ghost. Full name, Thomas Brennan, president of the Iron Reapers Mother Chapter. The man who'd built the club from 12 guys in a garage to a network that ran across 3 states. And Ghost had one rule that everyone knew. You don't embarrass the club. You don't put a Reaper on the floor in front of civilians and walk away. That's not a bar fight. That's a message. And messages get answered. 12 bikes, closing fast. Dalton pushed the truck to 80. The bikes matched him easily. They spread out behind him in a V formation, covering both lanes. 2 of them pulled alongside his truck, 1 on each side. The riders didn't look at him, they just rode, patient and controlled. This wasn't road rage, this was an operation. Dalton's mind ran through options. Outrun them. Impossible. The truck topped out at 90 and those bikes could do 140 without trying. Call the cops. His phone was dead. He'd forgotten to charge it at the diner. Pull over on the empty highway. Bad idea. No witnesses, no lights, nothing but sand and darkness for miles. Iris stirred in the back seat. She sat up, looked out the rear window at the wall of headlights, said nothing, just looked at her father in the mirror and waited. A mile ahead, Dalton saw it, a gas station, lit up against the desert dark. 2 pumps, small store, a patch of gravel. The fluorescent lights hummed against the empty night. It wasn't much, but it was public. It had lights, and it was the only option he had. He had 2 choices: keep driving and get run off the road somewhere with no lights and no witnesses, or pull over somewhere public and face whatever was coming. He pulled into the gas station. The bikes followed. They circled the lot once, slow, then parked in a line, engines off. 12 men dismounted. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They stood by their bikes and waited. One man walked forward. Ghost. He was smaller than Viper, maybe 5'10", lean, silver hair pulled back in a ponytail. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and a plain black leather jacket. He looked like a college professor who'd taken a very wrong turn somewhere in the 70s. He walked to Dalton's window, tapped on the glass, polite, like a neighbor borrowing sugar. Dalton rolled it down. Dalton Graves, the ghost said. Not a question. He knew. 3-time world champion, retired. He smiled. It was a thin smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. I looked you up while I was writing. You got a Wikipedia page and everything. Ghost paused. Let that sink in. 62 professional fights, 62 wins, 39 by knockout. That's impressive. Dalton said nothing. I also read that you retired 7 years ago, that you haven't fought since. And I'm wondering, a man who hasn't thrown a punch in 7 years, is he still the same man who won those titles? Or is he something less now? Dalton still said nothing. He knew what Ghost was doing, testing, probing, looking for fear. My boy Viper's in an ambulance right now, Ghost continued. Broken jaw. 2 of his guys are riding to the ER with busted ribs and a fractured orbital. That happened in my territory, in front of people. He paused. You understand what that means? Dalton glanced at the rear view. Iris was awake, watching. He touched my daughter, Dalton said. I heard. And I'm not saying he was right. Viper's always been stupid, but stupid or not, he's mine, and you made my club look weak in front of a diner full of strangers. That's not something I can let go. Ghost took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on. He did it slowly, like a man who had all the time in the world, and in that moment he did. Here's how this works, Ghost said. I've got a man named Reaper. He rides with the Mother Chapter. Before he rode with us, he was a Marine, 2 tours, combatives instructor. Taught guys how to kill people with their hands. He's the best fighter in my club, and I'm including Viper in that count. Dalton watched him. You and Reaper go right here, right now. Clean fight, no weapons. You win, you drive away. Nobody follows you. Nobody touches your little girl. You have my word, and my word is the only law out here. He glanced at the truck. You lose, I take the truck, the keys, whatever cash you've got, and you and your daughter walk to the nearest town. It's 11 miles east. Dalton looked at him. She's 7 years old. Then I suggest you don't lose. Dalton looked in the rearview mirror. Iris was awake. She was sitting up in her car seat watching him with those big brown eyes that looked so much like Natalie's. It hurt. Daddy, she said. Yeah, baby. Don't talk. He understood. She'd been saying it all night and he'd been hearing it wrong. She wasn't saying, don't talk to the bikers. She was saying, don't talk at all. Don't negotiate. Don't explain. Don't reason. Don't beg. Words were for people who had options. Right now, Dalton only had one option. So stop talking and do the thing you were built to do. Dalton got out of the truck. Reaper was already waiting. He'd stepped out from the line of bikers and stood in the middle of the gravel lot under the gas station lights. He was about Dalton's height, but thicker, heavier through the shoulders and chest. He stood with his weight, centered hands loose at his sides. military stance. This was a man who'd been in real fights, not bar fights, not cage fights, fights where the loser didn't get up. Dalton rolled his neck, shook out his hands, took a breath. The desert was quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The 12 bikers formed a loose circle around the two men. Nobody spoke. Nobody pulled out their phones. This wasn't entertainment. This was business. Ghost stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching. Dalton could feel Iris's eyes on him from inside the truck. He didn't look back. Couldn't afford to. Reaper moved first, fast for a big man. He closed the distance in 2 steps and threw a straight right that would have ended it if it landed. Dalton slipped left, barely, felt the wind from the punch pass his ear. He countered with a low kick to Reaper's lead thigh. It landed clean, solid contact, the kind of kick that should make a man wince. Reaper didn't flinch. That told Dalton everything he needed to know. This wasn't some weekend warrior who'd taken a few MMA classes. This was someone who'd trained to ignore pain, someone who'd been conditioned to keep fighting even when his body was screaming at him to stop. Here's the thing about fighting someone with real training. With a street fighter, you know what's coming. Haymakers, tackles, sloppy headlocks. You can handle that with technique. But a trained fighter takes away your advantages one at a time, like a chess player removing pieces. Reaper feinted a jab and shot a takedown. He was quick, but Dalton had been defending takedowns since he was 19. He sprawled, drove his hips down, hit Reaper with a short uppercut as he came up. That one Reaper felt. He stepped back, reset, wiped his mouth. For about 30 seconds they circled, testing, measuring. Dalton threw a combination, jab, cross, low kick. Reaper blocked the first 2 and checked the kick. He came back with a hook that caught Dalton on the temple. Dalton's vision flickered. His left ear rang. That was a hard shot, harder than anything he'd taken in competition. Reaper pressed forward. Another hook, followed by a knee. Dalton blocked the hook, but the knee caught him in the ribs, left side, just below the floating rib. Something cracked. Pain shot through his chest like electricity, sharp and immediate. Dalton backed up. Every breath felt like someone was driving a screwdriver between his ribs. Reaper kept coming. Another punch, another. Dalton covered up, absorbed the shots on his forearms, waiting for an opening. He could hear something behind him. Not the bikers. They were silent. It was softer than that, quieter. It was Iris, her small hand pressing against the truck window. He didn't look, couldn't afford to, but knowing she was there watching changed something in his chest, tightened something that had been loose since Natalie died. This is where most people would have broken. The pain, the pressure, 12 bikers watching, his daughter watching, a desert road with no help for miles. Most people would have dropped their hands, or tried to wrestle, or just given up. Dalton did none of those things. He'd been hurt worse in training. He'd fought with cracked ribs before. Tokyo 2016, title defense against a Japanese fighter who'd been undefeated in his home country. Dalton had taken a knee to the ribs in the 2nd round, heard the crack, fought 3 more rounds and won by decision. Pain was information. That's what his first coach used to say. It tells you what's broken and what still works. Right now his legs still worked, his right hand still worked, and his timing was still there. Buried under 7 years of retirement, but still there. Reaper threw another straight right, same punch he'd opened with, and this time Dalton didn't slip. He stepped into it, let the punch graze his forehead, felt the skin split, felt blood start to run, and fired his right elbow straight into Reaper's nose. The cartilage collapsed, blood went everywhere, warm, wet, splashing across Dalton's forearm. Reaper staggered. Dalton followed with a left hook to the body. Right where the ribs meet the liver, the exact spot where soft tissue and bone create a neural cluster that, when struck correctly, sends a signal to the brain that says, shut everything down. Reaper bent at the waist, and Dalton brought his right knee up into Reaper's chin with every pound of force his body could generate. Reaper went down, not slowly, not in stages. He went down like someone had cut his strings. His back hit the gravel and he didn't move. His eyes were open, but they weren't seeing anything. His chest rose and fell. He was alive, but he was done. The gas station went silent. 12 bikers. Not one of them said a word. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and Dalton Graves trying to breathe through broken ribs. Dalton stood over Reaper, blood on his knuckles, blood on his forehead where the punch had split the skin. His left side screamed with every breath. At least one broken rib. Maybe two. His right hand was swelling already. He'd feel all of this tomorrow. He'd feel it for weeks. But right now, standing in that gravel lot with the desert wind pulling at his shirt, he felt something else. Something he hadn't felt in 7 years. He felt like himself. Dalton turned and looked at Ghost. Ghost stood with his arms crossed. He looked at Reaper on the ground, looked at Dalton, and then he did something nobody expected. He clapped, slow, 3 times. "Well," Ghost said, "that's that." He walked to the line of bikes and said something to his men. One of them jogged to a saddlebag and came back with a first aid kit and a bag of ice. He brought them to Dalton. Didn't say a word, just held them out. Dalton took them. Ghost approached again. This time he didn't stop at arm's length. He walked right up to Dalton, close enough that Dalton could smell the leather and road dust on him. "Your daughter," Ghost said. "She told you not to talk." "She did." "Smart kid." Ghost paused, looked toward the truck where Iris was watching through the window. "I had daughter," he said. "Emma. She's 28 now, lives in Portland, doesn't call much. Hasn't called in 2 years, actually." He looked back at Dalton. "I don't blame her. This life doesn't leave room for the people who matter. By the time you figure that out, they're gone." Ghost pulled out a pack of cigarettes, offered one to Dalton. Dalton shook his head. Ghost lit one for himself, took a drag, blew the smoke toward the desert. "She's the reason you fight the way you do," Ghost said. "You know that, right? You weren't fighting for a title tonight. You weren't fighting for pride or respect or any of that bullshit." He pointed at the truck with his cigarette. "You were fighting for her. That's why you hit different. A man fighting for money hits hard. A man fighting for his kid hits like something else entirely." Dalton didn't answer that. He pressed the ice against his ribs and winced. Ghost took another drag. "I started this club when I was 25. Emma was born a year later. I thought I could do both. Be a father and build this thing. Turns out you can't, or maybe you can, but I couldn't." He flicked ash onto the gravel. "Missed her first steps because I was in Riverside setting up a charter. Missed her kindergarten graduation because we were running guns through Nevada. Missed her high school prom because some dipshit from a rival club thought he could move product in our territory without asking." Ghost looked at Dalton, really looked at him. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, something that looked almost like regret. "Last time Emma called me was 2 years ago. She said, 'You chose them over me. Don't call back.' And I haven't, because she's right. I did choose them every single time." He dropped the cigarette, ground it out with his boot. "I see you with that little girl, and I see every mistake I made, every choice I got wrong. You retired at 26, walked away from millions. People thought you were crazy, but you weren't. You were the only one smart enough to know what matters." Ghost reached into his jacket, pulled out a roll of cash, held it out. "For the gas," he said, "for the trouble." Dalton looked at the money. "I don't need that." "I know you don't. Take it anyway. For the girl." Dalton hesitated, then took it. Not because he needed it, because refusing a peace offering from a man like Ghost was its own kind of stupidity, and Dalton was done being stupid for one night. Ghost nodded. "Go to California, get her that place near the beach. Nobody from my club will bother you. You've got my word." He turned to walk back to his bike, then stopped, looked over his shoulder. "The quiet ones are always the strongest," he said. "Your daughter already knows that. Took me 52 years to figure it out." Ghost walked back to his motorcycle, swung his leg over. The other bikers were already mounting up. 2 of them helped Reaper to his feet. He was conscious now, groggy, but walking. The engine started, one by one, a rolling thunder that echoed across the desert, and then they were gone, riding east, back the way they'd come, taillights fading into the darkness until there was nothing left but the hum of the gas station lights and the wind. Dalton stood there for a moment, ice pressed against his ribs, blood drying on his forehead. His hands were shaking now, not from fear, from adrenaline leaving his system. from the crash that comes after you've pushed your body past what it's supposed to do. Everything hurt. The ribs, the knuckles, the cut above his eye. But he was alive, and Iris was safe, and that was all that mattered. He walked back to the truck, opened the door, sat down heavily. His hands were really shaking now. He gripped the steering wheel to steady them. Iris reached forward from her car seat, put her small hand on his shoulder. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah, baby. You can talk now." Dalton laughed. It hurt his ribs so bad his eyes watered. But he laughed anyway. A real laugh. The first one in a long time. Maybe since Natalie. He pulled onto the highway. The motorcycles were already gone. Taillights faded east while Dalton drove west. The desert stretched ahead of them, wide and dark and empty, and somewhere out there past the sand and the scrub was the Pacific Ocean. Iris would hear the waves at night. She'd start a new school. She'd draw more pictures of houses with red doors. And maybe one day she'd live in one. Dalton drove with one hand on the wheel and the other pressed against his ribs. The pain was settling in now, deep, grinding. Every bump in the road sent a jolt through his side. But he kept driving, because that's what you do. You keep moving forward even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. He thought about Natalie, about the last thing she'd said to him before the morphine took her under for good. She grabbed his hand and said, "Don't let her go quiet, Dalton. She's got my voice in there somewhere. You just have to be patient." He'd promised, and for 2 years he'd failed. Iris had stayed quiet, and Dalton hadn't known how to reach her. But tonight she'd spoken. Not much, but the right words at the right time. And Dalton was starting to understand that Iris's silence wasn't grief. It was strength. She wasn't broken. She was choosing when to speak and when to hold back, just like her father in the ring. The highway stretched on, empty, 2 lanes of asphalt cutting through nothing. Iris was quiet for a long time. Then somewhere past Victorville, she said something that broke Dalton Graves in half. "Mom used to tell me that when you bite, you don't make any sound." Dalton's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "She said that's how she always knew you were serious, when you went quiet." Iris's voice was small, soft, but clear. "She said the quiet ones are the strongest because they don't waste anything. Not their words, not their energy, not their love." Dalton's eyes blurred. He blinked, felt tears run down both cheeks. He hadn't cried since the funeral. Hadn't been able to. The grief had been stuck somewhere deep in his chest, like a fist that wouldn't unclench. But hearing Natalie's words come out of Iris's mouth, in Iris's voice, with Iris's calm, it broke something loose. He pulled the truck to the shoulder, put it in park, and he let it come. All of it. The year of silence, the months of holding it together, the funeral where he'd stood in a black suit and shaken hands and said thank you for coming 100 times and never once let himself fall apart because Iris was watching and he needed to be strong. Iris unbuckled her car seat, climbed into the front, wrapped her arms around his neck. She was small and warm and she smelled like crayons and chocolate milkshake and everything that was still good in Dalton Graves' world. "Don't talk, Daddy," she whispered, but this time she was smiling. "Just drive." So he did. He pulled back onto the highway and drove west into the dark. No radio, no words, just the hum of the engine and the stars over the desert and a 7-year-old girl who understood silence better than anyone he'd ever met. The miles passed, one after another. The desert gave way to hills. The hills gave way to valleys. And slowly over hours, the air began to change. It got cooler, heavier. There was salt in it. Dalton knew that smell. He'd smelled it before. In Thailand, in Brazil, in every coastal city he'd ever fought in. It was the ocean. They reached the coast just as the sun was coming up. Dalton crested a hill, and there it was. The Pacific, stretching from horizon to horizon, gray and blue and endless. He pulled off the highway at an overlook, turned off the engine. Iris climbed out of the truck, walked to the edge of the cliff, stood there with her hands in her pockets and the wind pulling at her braids. Dalton got out too, slowly. Every movement hurt, but he walked over and stood next to her. They looked at the ocean together, didn't say anything, just listened to the waves breaking on the rocks below. After a long time, Iris said, "It sounds like breathing." Dalton looked at her. She was right. It did. In and out, steady, constant, the way a chest rises and falls when someone's sleeping. He reached into the truck bed, pulled out the wooden box, the one with Natalie's ashes. He opened it. The ashes were gray and fine, like sand, like dust. "You want to help?" he asked Iris. She nodded. Together they scattered the ashes over the cliff, watched them catch the wind, watched them spread and dissolve into the air, into the ocean, into everything. Dalton didn't say goodbye, didn't say anything at all. Natalie had told him to bring Iris to the ocean, to let her hear something constant, and now he understood why. The ocean didn't stop. It didn't leave. It just kept going. Wave after wave, breath after breath. It was the opposite of grief. They stood there for a while. Then Iris tugged on his sleeve. "I'm hungry," she said. Dalton smiled. "Yeah, me too." They got back in the truck, drove down the hill, into Santa Monica. The town was just waking up. Joggers on the beach, surfers in the water, coffee shops opening their doors. Dalton found a diner, parked out front. They went inside. A waitress brought them menus, asked if they wanted coffee. Dalton said yes. Iris asked for orange juice. While they waited, Dalton looked around. The diner was clean, bright. There was a window that looked out onto the street. Palm trees swayed outside. It felt safe. He didn't realize how much he'd needed that until right now. Iris was looking at the menu, studying it like it was homework. "What do you want?" Dalton asked. "Pancakes," she said, "with strawberries." "You got it." The waitress came back. Dalton ordered eggs and toast for him, pancakes for Iris. They ate slowly. Neither of them had much to say, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind you can only have with someone who knows you don't always need to fill the air with words. After breakfast, Dalton drove around Santa Monica, looking at apartment buildings. Most of them were too expensive, way out of his range. But he kept looking. Finally, he found one. A small two-bedroom, about 3 blocks from the beach. The paint was peeling, the stairs creaked, but the landlord was standing outside. Dalton pulled over, got out, walked up. The landlord was an older man, late 60s, gray hair, navy tattoo on his forearm. His name was Everett Walsh. "Help you," Walsh said. "You got any units available?" Dalton asked. Walsh looked at him, looked at the truck, looked at Iris in the passenger seat. "Might," he said. "You got first and last month's rent." Dalton thought about the cash Ghost had given him. "Yeah." "You got a job?" "I'll find one." Walsh studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Come on, I'll show you what I got." The apartment was on the 2nd floor. It smelled like old carpet and cleaning solution. The kitchen was small, the bathroom smaller, but it had 2 bedrooms and a balcony that faced west, toward the ocean. Dalton walked out onto the balcony, listened, and there it was, faint, distant, but there, the sound of waves. "I'll take it," he said. Walsh raised an eyebrow. "You don't want to think about it?" "No." "Fair enough." They went downstairs, signed the papers. Dalton paid in cash. Walsh handed him the keys. "You two look road-weary," Walsh said. "We are," Dalton replied. "Well, welcome to Santa Monica." Dalton drove back to the apartment, parked the truck. He and Iris carried their bags upstairs. It didn't take long. They didn't have Mo. Iris walked through the apartment, touching the walls, looking out the windows. She stopped at the balcony door. "Can I go out there?" she asked. "Yeah." She opened the door, stepped outside, stood at the railing and listened. Dalton watched her from inside. She looked small out there, but not fragile, just small. After a while, she came back in. "I like it here," she said. "Good," Dalton said, "because this is home now." That night, they unpacked. Dalton set up Iris's bed, hung Natalie's wedding photo on the wall, the only photo he'd kept. Iris unpacked her crayons, her coloring books, and the drawing, the one she'd done at Rosie's diner, the house with the red door. She held it up. "Look," she said. Dalton looked, really looked. The house in the drawing had 2 windows, a tree in the yard, and in the background, barely visible, a horizon line. Blue, like water. It looked exactly like the kind of house they might live in someday. "How did you know?" Dalton asked. "How did you know we'd get here?" Iris smiled, small, quiet. "Mom told me," she said, "the night before she died. She woke me up. She was really sick, but she wanted to talk. Dalton sat down on the edge of her bed. His ribs hurt. His hands hurt. Everything hurt. But he listened. She said you were going to be scared, Iris continued. She said you were going to think you weren't enough, but that I had to show you that you were. Iris looked at the drawing, at the house she'd imagined. She said when things get hard, I should tell you don't talk. Just do what you know is right. Dalton's throat tightened. You've been carrying that for 2 years, he asked. I was waiting for the right time, Iris said. This feels right. Dalton pulled her into a hug, held her tight, and for the second time that night, he let himself cry. Not from pain, not from grief, from relief. Because Natalie had been right. Iris did have her voice. It had been there the whole time. She'd just been saving it, for the moments that mattered. They stayed like that for a while. Then Dalton tucked her into bed, turned off the light, stood in the doorway. Good night, Daddy, Iris said. Good night, baby. Don't talk, he smiled. I won't. Dalton closed the door, walked to the balcony, stood in the cool night air and listened to the ocean breathe. Tomorrow he'd find work. Tomorrow he'd enroll Iris in school. Tomorrow he'd figure out what comes next. But tonight he just stood there, letting the sound of the waves wash over him, letting the salt air fill his lungs. And for the first time in 2 years, Dalton Graves felt something close to peace. 3 months passed. Dalton found work the second week. Construction, day labor, framing houses in Culver City for a contractor who didn't ask questions and paid in cash at the end of every shift. The work was hard, physical. 12-hour days in the sun, swinging a hammer and hauling lumber. His ribs were still healing. Every morning he woke up sore. Every night he came home exhausted. But it was honest work, and it paid enough to cover rent and food and the basics. Iris started at Lincoln Elementary, 2nd grade, a small school 6 blocks from the apartment. Dalton walked her there the first day, watched her go through the gate with her backpack and her lunchbox and her box of crayons. She didn't look back, just walked straight to the classroom like she'd been going there her whole life. The teacher's name was Mrs. Rodriguez. She was in her 50s. Kind eyes, patient voice. At the end of the first week, she called Dalton. I wanted to check in about Iris, she said. Dalton's stomach tightened. Is there a problem? No, not at all. She's doing very well. She's polite. She follows directions. She's clearly bright. But she doesn't talk much. She answers when I call on her. But she doesn't volunteer. Doesn't chat with the other kids at recess. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay at home. Dalton explained. Briefly, about Natalie, about the silence, about the therapists. Mrs. Rodriguez listened. When he finished, she said, Thank you for telling me. I won't push her. Some kids just need more time. Thank you, Dalton said. She's a lovely girl, Mr. Graves. She'll find her voice when she's ready. Dalton hoped she was right, but as the weeks went on, he started to notice something. Iris was talking. Not a lot, but more than before. She'd come home from school and tell him about her day. Short sentences, simple updates. We learned about fractions. I sat with a girl named Amy at lunch. We're reading a book about a mouse. It wasn't the flood of words Natalie used to get, but it was something, and something was more than nothing. At night after dinner, they'd sit on the balcony and listen to the ocean. Iris would draw. Dalton would sit with a beer he never finished and watch the sun go down. Sometimes she'd show him what she was drawing. Usually houses, always with red doors. You really like red doors, he said one night. Mom liked them, Iris said. She said red means home. Dalton didn't know that, didn't know Natalie had said that, but hearing it now from Iris, it felt like a message, like Natalie was still there somehow, still guiding them. On Saturdays, Dalton took Iris to the beach. They'd walk on the sand, she'd collect shells. He'd watch the surfers and think about how different this life was from the one he'd left behind. No cameras, no crowds, no announcers calling his name, just him and his daughter and the sound of the waves. It was better. But there was something missing, something Dalton couldn't quite name. He'd notice it at night, after Iris went to bed, when the apartment was quiet and he was alone with his thoughts. He'd feel it in his hands, the way they'd clench without him realizing it, the way his pulse would quicken for no reason. He'd turn on the TV sometimes, find a fight, Boxing, MMA didn't matter. He'd watch and his body would react. Shoulders tensing, breath shortening, hands forming fists. He'd turn it off, frustrated with himself. One night around 2 in the morning, he couldn't sleep. The restlessness was too strong. He got dressed, drove to a 24-hour gym he'd seen on the way to work. The place was mostly empty, a few insomniacs on treadmills, a guy doing curls in the corner, and in the back a heavy bag. Dalton walked over to it, stood in front of it, didn't touch it, just looked. The last time he'd hit a heavy bag was the week before Natalie's funeral. He'd gone to his old gym in Tucson, spent 2 hours destroying his hands because it was the only thing that made sense, the only thing that felt real. He'd promised himself he wouldn't do that again, wouldn't use violence as a release, as a drug. But standing there now in this fluorescent-lit gym at 2 in the morning, he felt the pull. Strong, undeniable. He hit the bag. Once, a jab, tentative. The bag swung, came back. He hit it again, harder, across, and then he couldn't stop. Jab, cross, hook, low kick, high kick. Combinations he'd drilled 10,000 times. Muscle memory taking over. His body remembering what his mind had tried to forget. He worked the bag for 20 minutes, until his hands were numb and his shirt was soaked and his lungs were burning. And when he stopped, he felt better, clearer, like something that had been building up inside him had finally found a way out. You hit like you've done this before. Dalton turned. There was a man standing a few feet away, early 50s, stocky build, graying hair. He wore a gym shirt and track pants, had the look of someone who'd spent time on the job. Long time ago, Dalton said. Doesn't look that long to me. Muscle memory's a bitch. Dalton wiped his face with his shirt. Yeah. The man walked closer, extended his hand. Tony Sullivan, used to be LAPD, retired last year. Dalton shook it. Dalton Graves. I know, Tony said. Dalton blinked. You know, the surgeon Wright 3-time world champion. Retired undefeated. I used to watch your fights. You were something else. Dalton didn't know what to say to that. What are you doing in Santa Monica? Tony asked. Starting over, Dalton said. Sure. Tony nodded, like that made perfect sense. Good place for it. They talked for a while, about nothing important. Boxing, the city, the gym. When Dalton finally left, Tony called after him. You ever want to train, I'm here most nights. Wouldn't mind working the mitts with someone who actually knows what they're doing. Dalton nodded but didn't commit. He went home, slipped back into the apartment quietly, checked on Iris. She was asleep, curled up with her stuffed rabbit. He stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. And he realized something. Ghost had been right. You can't run from what you are. Dalton was a fighter. That was in his bones, in his blood. No amount of distance or time was going to change that. The question was what he did with it. A week later, Dalton was on a job site when a man approached him. Older, early 60s, white hair, kind face. He walked with a slight limp. You Dalton Graves, the man asked. Dalton set down the 2x4 he was carrying. Yeah. Ramon Ortega. I run the community center on 4th Street. Dalton wiped the sweat from his forehead. Okay. I heard you used to train fighters, world-class fighters. Dalton glanced around. The other guys on the crew were watching, listening. Used to, Dalton said. Not anymore. I'm looking for someone to teach self-defense classes. Kids, mostly from the neighborhood. A lot of them come from rough situations. Could use someone to show them how to handle themselves. I'm not a teacher, Dalton said. Your daughter goes to Lincoln Elementary, right? Dalton's eyes narrowed. How do you know that? My niece is in her class, Amy Ortega. Iris told her, my dad's the strongest person alive, but he never starts fights. Ramon smiled. That's exactly what I need. Someone who knows when not to fight. That's harder to teach than throwing a punch. Dalton looked at him, at the honesty in his face. I don't know, Dalton said. Think about it. We can't pay much, but it's good work, important work. Ramon handed him a card, walked away. Dalton looked at the card, then put it in his pocket. That night at dinner, he asked Iris about Amy. She's nice, Iris said. She shares her crayons. You told her about me. Iris looked up from her chicken nuggets. I said you were strong. Why'd you say that? Because it's true. Dalton thought about that. About what Iris saw when she looked at him. Not a fighter, not someone dangerous, just someone strong. If I taught kids how to protect themselves, Dalton said carefully, would you want to help? Maybe watch sometimes? Iris considered this. Would I have to talk? Not if you didn't want to. Then okay. 2 days later, Dalton called Ramon, said he'd do it. Trial basis, one class, see how it went. The community center was a low brick building with a basketball court out front and a parking lot that needed repaving. Inside, it smelled like floor wax and old coffee. Ramon met him at the door, showed him the room. It was small, worn mats on the floor, mirrors on one wall, a few pieces of equipment in the corner. It's not much, Ramon said. It's fine, Dalton replied. The kids started arriving at 4, 8 of them, ages 7 to 12, nervous energy, talking over each other, shoving, laughing. Dalton stood at the front of the room and waited. It took a minute, but they noticed. One by one, they got quiet. How many of you have been in a fight? Dalton asked. 3 hands went up, hesitant. How many of you wanted to be in that fight? The hands went down. Good, Dalton said. Fighting's not about wanting to, it's about having to, and knowing the difference. He spent the next hour teaching them how to be aware, how to notice who's around them, how to trust their instincts when something feels wrong. He didn't teach them how to throw a punch, didn't show them any flashy moves. He taught them how to escape, how to break a wrist grab, how to create distance, how to run. The goal, he said, is to get away, not to win, not to prove anything, just to get away and get safe. At the end of the class, one of the kids raised his hand. A small boy, 9 years old, pale skin, bruise on his arm that looked a few days old. What if they're bigger? The boy asked. What's your name? Dalton asked. Tommy Gallagher. Tommy, if they're bigger, you're smarter. Size isn't everything. Knowing when to fight and when to run, that's everything. Tommy nodded, but Dalton could see it in his eyes. The boy didn't believe him. Iris had been sitting in the corner the whole time, doing her homework, watching quietly. As the kids filed out, she walked over to Tommy. My dad's right, she said. Being smart is better than being big. Tommy looked at her, then at Dalton, then back at her. Okay, he said. After everyone left, Ramon walked Dalton to his truck. That was good, Ramon said. Really good. They're just kids, Dalton said. Exactly. And you treated them like they mattered. A lot of people don't. Ramon paused. Think you could do this twice a week? Dalton thought about the way the kids had listened, about the way Iris had spoken up. Yeah, he said, I could do that. Over the next few months, the class grew. Word spread. More kids signed up. 10, then 15, then 20. Dalton kept it simple. Awareness, de-escalation, basic escapes. He never taught them to fight back, just to protect themselves. Tommy Gallagher became a regular, never missed a class. Dalton noticed the bruises kept appearing, different places, different stage of healing. He asked Tommy about it once. I'm clumsy, Tommy said. Dalton didn't believe that, but he didn't push. One day, Tommy showed up with a black eye, fresh, swollen. Dalton pulled him aside. Who did that? Nobody. Tommy. The boy looked at the floor. There's a kid at school, 8th grader. He takes my lunch money. Did you tell a teacher? My mom did. They suspended him for a day. He came back worse. Dalton's jaw tightened. What's he want? $5 every day. And if you don't have it, Tommy touched his eye, didn't answer. Dalton wanted to tell the kid to fight back, wanted to teach him how to throw a proper punch, how to make the bully think twice. But that wasn't the lesson. That was his anger talking, his instinct to solve problems with violence. Iris was watching from across the room. She walked over. Don't fight him, she said to Tommy. Make him look stupid. Dalton looked at her. What? If you fight him, you get in trouble, but if you make him look stupid, everyone laughs at him. That's worse. Tommy frowned. How? Iris thought for a second. Next time he asks for money, give it to him. But say it really loud. Say, you need $5? Are you okay? Do you need help? Make sure people hear. He'll just take it, Tommy said. Yeah, but everyone will know he needed it, that he's asking a little kid for money. That's embarrassing. Dalton stared at his daughter. She was 7 years old, and she just solved a problem he couldn't. The next week, Tommy came to class smiling. "It worked," he said. "I did what Iris said." I asked him really loud if he needed the money. If things were okay at home, a bunch of kids heard. They started laughing. Not at me, at him. "Did he take the money?" Dalton asked. "Yeah, but he hasn't asked again. I think he's too embarrassed." Dalton looked at Iris. She was in the corner, drawing, not paying attention to the conversation. But she'd heard. He could tell by the way the corner of her mouth turned up, just slightly. That night, Dalton sat with her in the balcony. "You were right," he said, "about Tommy." "I know," she said. "Where'd you learn that?" She shrugged. "Mom used to say you can't fight mean with mean. You have to fight it with smart." Dalton felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came every time Iris said something that sounded exactly like Natalie. "She was a smart woman," he said. "I know," Iris said again. 6 months into running the classes, Ramon approached Dalton with an idea. "What if we made this official?" Ramon said. "Turn it into a real program. Get some funding. Expand." "I don't know anything about running a program," Dalton said. "You don't have to. I'll handle the paperwork. You just keep doing what you're doing." Dalton thought about it. "What would we call it?" Ramon smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask that." He looked at Iris. She was demonstrating a wrist escape to a younger student. Patient, calm, not saying much, but the kid was listening. "Ask her," Ramon said. That night Dalton did. "If we gave the class a name," he said, "what would you call it?" Iris didn't hesitate. "The quiet room." "Why what do I? Because you teach them to be quiet inside. Like you." Dalton looked at her, really looked. This 7-year-old kid who saw things he didn't, who understood things he was still figuring out. "The quiet room it is," he said. The name stuck. Within a year, they had 60 students, kids from all over Santa Monica, different backgrounds, different stories, but all of them learning the same thing: how to be strong without being violent, how to protect themselves without becoming the thing they were afraid of. Dalton still worked construction 3 days a week, but the other 4 he was at the quiet room, teaching, watching, learning as much from the kids as they learned from him. Iris helped sometimes. She'd demonstrate techniques. She'd sit with the younger kids and color while Dalton taught. She'd become a fixture, part of the place, and slowly she talked more. Not to everyone, but to the kids who needed it, the ones who were quiet like her. One afternoon, 8 months after they'd started, a man walked into the quiet room. Dalton was in the middle of a class, didn't notice at first, but then he saw the leather cut, the patches, the Iron Reaper's logo. His body tensed, hands instinctively forming fists. The man stood near the door, watching. He was older. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, ghost. Dalton told the kids to take 5, grabbed water, walked over. "Didn't expect to see you here," Dalton said. His voice was calm, but his heart was racing. "Peace," Ghost said, raised his hands. "Just passing through California. Heard you open this place. Wanted to see it." "Why?" Ghost looked around, at the kids, at the mats, at Iris sitting in the corner with her coloring book. "Remember I told you about my daughter, Emma?" Dalton nodded. "She called me 2 weeks ago, first time in 2 years. Ghost's voice was different, softer, almost uncertain. "She's pregnant. I'm going to be a grandfather." Dalton didn't know what to say to that. "She said she doesn't want her kid growing up not knowing me. Said everyone deserves a second chance." Ghost took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on. "I'm stepping down from the Reapers. 25 years, and I'm choosing different." "Why are you telling me this?" Dalton asked. "Because you did it first. You retired at your peak, walked away from millions. I thought you were weak. Turns out you were the only one strong enough to know what mattered." Ghost reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope, held it out. "For the gym, for the kids." Dalton looked at the envelope. "I can't take that. It's not for you, it's for them. From someone who wishes he'd met you 20 years ago." Dalton hesitated, then took it. Inside was $5,000 in cash. "Ghost?" "Thomas," Ghost said. "My name's Thomas, and I'm not Ghost anymore, just a guy trying to figure out how to be a grandfather." He looked at Iris. She was watching them, not scared, just observing. "Your daughter watching you fight that night," Thomas said. That changed something in me, made me realize what I'd lost, what I'd given up. He turned to leave, stopped at the door. The quiet ones are the strongest, he said. Took me 52 years to learn that. Your daughter already knows. And then he was gone. Dalton stood there holding the envelope, not sure what had just happened. Iris walked over. Was that the motorcycle man? Yeah. Is he going to hurt us? No, baby, I don't think so. She nodded, went back to her coloring. Dalton used the money to buy new mats, new equipment. He put the rest aside for the kids who couldn't afford to pay. 2 years passed. Iris turned 10. She was in 5th grade now. She had friends. She talked more. Not all the time, but enough. She still chose her words carefully, still only spoke when it mattered. But that was okay. Dalton had learned that silence wasn't always absence. Sometimes it was just wisdom. The quiet room was thriving. They'd moved to a bigger space, had 3 instructors now, over 100 students. Local news did a story on them. Former champion teaches kids restraint. They interviewed Dalton, asked him about his career, about why he walked away. I didn't walk away from fighting, he said on camera. I walked towards something better. That something was sitting in the corner of the gym, doing homework, helping younger kids with their technique, being exactly who she was supposed to be. Iris. One afternoon in early spring, Dalton got a call from a realtor. A small house had just gone on the market. 3 bedrooms, walking distance from the beach. It was more than he could afford, but he went to look anyway. The house was old, needed work, the paint was peeling, the yard was overgrown. But it had 2 windows in the front, a tree in the yard, and a view of the ocean from the back porch. Dalton thought about the drawing, the one Iris had done at Rosie's Diner. The house with the red door. He made an offer, lower than asking, fully expecting them to reject it. They accepted. 3 months later, Dalton and Iris moved in. The first thing Iris did was pick the paint color for the front door. Red. They spent the summer fixing the place up. Dalton did most of the work himself. Iris helped where she could, painting, planting flowers, hanging pictures. On move-in day, Iris stood in the front yard, looking at the house, at the red door, at the tree. She pulled out the old drawing, the one from the diner, held it up, it matched. Exactly. How did you know? Dalton asked. Not for the first time. Iris smiled. Mom showed me, in a dream, the night before she died. Dalton knelt down, eye level with his daughter. What else did she show you? Iris thought about it. She showed me you, teaching kids, being happy. She said you were always meant to do this. You just had to find your way there. Dalton's eyes stung. He pulled Iris into a hug. I miss her, Iris whispered. Me too, baby. Every day. They stood there for a long time, in front of their house, the one with the red door, the one Iris had dreamed about before she even knew it was possible. That night, Dalton unpacked the last box. Inside were his championship belts. He pulled them out, looked at them. Gold, leather, engraved with his name, with his record. They felt like they belonged to someone else. Iris walked into the room, saw the belts. Are you going to hang those up? She asked. Dalton looked at them, then at her. No, he said. I think they belong somewhere else. The next day he donated them to the quiet room, had a plaque made. It read, Strength isn't winning, it's knowing when to stop. He hung them on the wall, where the kids could see them. A reminder that walking away from something doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it makes you stronger. That evening, Dalton and Iris walked to the Santa Monica Pier. The sun was setting, orange and pink spreading across the sky. They stood at the railing, watching the waves, listening to the gulls. Dad, Iris said, do you still miss fighting? Dalton thought about it, really thought about it. No, he said. I miss your mom, but I don't miss that. Good, Iris said, because you're still fighting, just different. Dalton looked at her. What do you mean you fight for us, for the kids at the gym, just with different tools? She slipped her hand into his. They stood there, silent, watching the sun sink into the ocean. Dalton thought about everything that had led them here. The diner, the desert, the fight under gas station lights, the long drive west, the apartment, the quiet room, this house, this moment, all of it, every choice, every mistake, every moment of pain and doubt and fear. It had led them here, to this pier, this sunset, this peace. Iris leaned against him. Didn't say anything, didn't need to. Dalton looked out at the ocean, at the endless stretch of water, at the waves that kept coming, one after another, constant, steady, never stopping. And he understood what Natalie had meant, what she'd been trying to tell him. Iris needed to hear something constant, something that didn't leave, something that didn't change. And now she had it, not just the ocean, but him, her father, still here, still standing, still fighting for her in the only way that mattered, by being present, by being steady, by being the kind of man who knew when to talk and when to stay quiet. The sun disappeared below the horizon. The sky turned purple. Stars began to appear. "We should go home," Dalton said. "Okay," Iris said. They walked back along the pier, past the tourists and the street performers and the smell of cotton candy. Back to the parking lot, back to the truck that had carried them across the desert. Dalton started the engine, drove the 3 blocks home, parked in front of the house with the red door. Inside, Iris went to her room, changed into her pajamas, brushed her teeth, climbed into bed. Dalton came in to say goodnight, sat on the edge of her bed like he did every night. "Good night, baby," he said. "Good night, Daddy." She smiled. "Don't talk." He smiled back. "I won't." He kissed her forehead, turned off the light, left the door cracked open just enough to let the hallway light in, walked to his own room, changed, lay down in bed. Through the open window he could hear it, faint, distant, but there, the ocean, breathing, in and out, steady, constant, the way it would sound tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that. Dalton closed his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he fell asleep without fighting it. The ocean breathed outside his window, steady, constant, the sound Natalie had wanted Iris to hear. And Dalton finally understood. It wasn't just about the waves, it was about him, being the constant, being the thing that didn't leave, the thing that kept going day after day, breath after breath, not a champion, not a fighter, just a father.